Hi, I'm Elizabeth of Lore, and today I'm going to tell you a story. This is a story about me, or more accurately, it's a story about an aspect of myself that exists in what we conventionally refer to as the past. This aspect of myself existed for years, for a long, long time, maybe 2 decades, even a little longer. And the predominant characteristic of myself at that time was that I existed in an almost constant state of pain and misery and suffering. For a big chunk of that time, my favorite activity was filling a syringe with black tar heroin or another opioid and injecting it into my body. And I was doing that because I didn't want to experience the sensation of being in my body. I didn't want to experience the sensation of being present with my mind or myself because I was in pain, predominantly emotional pain that resulted from an abusive relationship, physically, sexually, emotionally, verbally, all the abuses that I experienced when I was a teenager. And I was diagnosed with depression. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I experienced anxiety, depression, PTSD symptoms on a pretty much daily basis for this time period. And the only way that I knew how to put a buffer between myself and that pain and suffering was through the use of substances, and I used in a chaotic manner. So I do want to just put a caveat that I don't have any kind of judgment or negative feeling about any substance or people who use them, including my own past self. However, the way that I was using that substance and the reasons for my use were harmful to me. It actually did help me to survive a time period when I had no other better coping skills. So I thank it for that. But it also caused me a lot of harm because I became addicted and dependent on it. And of course, that perpetuated a cycle of suffering. So I believed very strongly that my life was essentially, in a way, destined to constant pain and suffering, or near constant. That would be the prevailing experience of my life for the rest of my life. I really believed that. It wasn't like a conscious thought I told myself. It was something I believed so strongly I didn't even need to tell it to myself. That's how powerful it was. And of course, because of that, I engaged in behaviors like cutting, like using IV heroin, like attempting suicide. I engaged in these behaviors that perpetuated more pain and suffering. So I believed in my pain and suffering and misery, and then I created more pain and suffering and misery because of that belief. And it was a very long and difficult cycle that I had at the time no idea how to break out of at all, and didn't think that I ever could. However, that's not the end of the story. I was actually wrong. At this current frame of linear time, I no longer identify as having depression or PTSD, which may be a surprising and controversial statement to people who subscribe strongly to Western psychiatry or psychology, because those conditions are typically considered treatable but not curable. And I'm not a medical practitioner, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, I'm not a diagnostician, but for myself, in my experience, I no longer identify as having those conditions, which isn't to say that I never experience some of the symptoms of those conditions. Is that I do sometimes feel kind of that pit in my stomach, depression feeling. I do sometimes have physiological responses to external, internal stimuli that trigger some kind of trauma memory in my body. However, I'm able to allow them to pass. I'm able to observe them and let them pass. So they're experiences I have, and experiences are transitory rather than conditions of my mind and body. So I no longer identify as having those conditions because that's not my experience anymore. And I want to share with you how I came to that point. I could tell a much longer story about all of the things I did, particularly in 2021, to kind of lead me to this realization that I'm going to share to you. And I'll just briefly list them instead of telling the long story. But really, the truth is, the realization itself is enough. I recommend any of these things to anyone that feels called to them. But the realization itself is enough, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. So the things that I did that helped me come to this realization were engaging in near daily exercise, so running, strength training, yoga, that kind of thing. I connected with other people who shared similar spiritual beliefs with me and who I felt connected with on the level of spirit, people who I felt like a soul recognition with. Really, those relationships have been really meaningful for me. And I managed to acquire many of them in 2021, which is really cool. I also engaged in plant medicine, which is amazing. And I recognize that there are some legality issues in the United States that some of these medicines face, which should not be in any case. But if you feel called to them and have access, something I highly recommend. I will say, heroin is plant medicine too, right? But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the more visionary spectrum of plant medicines. So those are a lot of the things that I did that helped. Oh, and also meditation, different forms of meditation helped as well. And these are things I continue to utilize and that continue to help me have realizations and become more aligned with my real self, my spirit. But these are really what led me to this realization. And the realization is every emotion we experience, whether we label it as negative or label it as positive, every emotion is love. Every emotion at its origin place is love. Every emotion is a mask that love is wearing. Really, every emotion is a mask that love is wearing. And it's really that simple. It really is that simple. But I'll explain a little more in case that's helpful for some of the people seeing this. So I'll tell you another story, a short one, that helps illustrate this point. My Tia Marjorie, my aunt, passed away right before the new year. And it was pretty unexpected. She had acquired the COVID virus and didn't really follow treatments and protocols that could have helped with that kind of virus for a while and ended up needing to be hospitalized as a result. She also had underlying conditions. And although the hospital was able to get the virus out of her body, it exacerbated these underlying conditions. So she was in a state at the hospital where she seemed like she was doing much better and would be coming home maybe with a need for some assistance with those conditions, but would be okay ultimately. And then one day she lost consciousness very suddenly and within a couple hours had passed out of this dimension. So it was not something that I expected, and it was a shock. And of course, this is my aunt. I've known her my whole life. I've loved her my whole life. She was one of the first people to recognize my channeling abilities, even if she didn't necessarily call it that, and was a really important person in my life. And it was a very sad and upsetting event. However, because of this realization, I was able to process it in a way that wasn't life-shattering. I was able to recognize that my sadness was based it was grief. My grief was the result of missing my aunt, my ability to see my aunt in linear time in this dimension and spend time with her. And the reason I missed that is because I love her. So my sadness was actually love. And now when I think of my aunt, I don't have to walk back those steps. I can actually think of her most of the time and just feel the emotion of love. Occasionally, if I think of kind of the thought of her is rooted more in her passing than in just her, I will feel a little bit of sadness, and then I just say to it, I say to my sadness, thank you for your service, because of course every emotion we experience, whether we perceive it as negative or positive, has a role, has a vital service to us. So I sit with it, I say thank you for your service, and then I ask it to show me its true face, and then I feel love. And it's really that simple. You can do that too. And you can do it with any emotion at all. Any emotion at all. Let's say someone has done you an injustice, right? And you feel angry about it. Justifiably so, right? You've been done an injustice. But why do you feel angry? Why do you care that someone has done you an injustice? Why does it matter? Because you love yourself, right? And I say this as someone who didn't believe that I loved myself for a very long time. But the thing is, even if you feel like there are a lot of things you don't like about yourself or that you even think you hate about yourself, you do love yourself. If you're experiencing indignation or anger or sadness or any of those emotions at some condition that you're in, if you're experiencing, if you're reacting with those emotions at some condition that's being imposed upon you, or that you're imposing on yourself, or that you're experiencing, then that means it's coming from a place of self-love. Because if you didn't love yourself, then you wouldn't care at all, right? So it's coming from a place of self-love, and you can use the steps that I described to kind of do it almost like a thought experiment. Just think, and it may be more than one mask that you have to take off for your sadness or your anger, but you can walk it back. And when you walk it back from that first mask that it showed you initially, you can walk it back until you get to the place of love. And it's beautiful, because love is truly the origin of all emotion. It is the point of creation. And don't get me wrong, this is not a form of emotional suppression. I would never recommend that. That was what I was doing with the heroin. It's not healthy. When you suppress your emotions, they really just get buried inside and they build up, and then they end up coming out in these chaotic, sometimes uncontrollable ways. When someone gets really angry over this like little tiny thing, it's usually because they've suppressed something and now they're reacting, it appears, to this minor thing, but really they're reacting to something that they didn't properly react to in the past. This isn't that. This is just the removal of all the trappings. This is just the taking off of the mask and coming to the place of origin. And it is important that you take a moment or two to sit with the emotion that it presented itself as, and to recognize it and acknowledge, I am experiencing sadness. And then I like to thank it for its service. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. And then you can walk it back, or you can ask it to show its true face. And then when you do react, if it's something that you feel that you need to react to, instead of reacting from a more distant place, from a place of anger or some other emotion that isn't love, you're reacting out of love. And you're less likely in that case to do something that you may later regret. And another good thing about it is that if you react and perhaps you don't succeed in the goal, that the intention of your reaction, you're still going to feel good about how you reacted, because you reacted from a place of love. So you know that you tried your best. You truly did. You weren't reacting out of anger. You weren't reacting out of anxiety or fear or sadness. You were reacting out of love. So you will know that you did your best. And the truth is that when you react from that origin point, it is more likely that you are actually going to succeed with the intention that you set for that reaction. Now, this really is the easiest thing in the world. It really is. But if you feel like you need a little bit of help accessing this, like I said, you can take those steps that I mentioned. Another thing that you can do if you're having trouble actually feeling the emotion of love, which can be hard if you're out of practice with it, it's helpful for to think about things that make me feel love. So it's better if they're associated with the stimuli, right? So for example, with my aunt, I can, if I were to have trouble feeling that emotion, I could think about things I loved about her, specific concrete things I loved about her, or I could remember fond memories with her. It's a lot easier to think of something concrete and feel the emotion that we associate with it. So if you think of something that you know you love, or an event that you know you love, then you're going to start to feel love. And the more you practice this, the easier it gets. So when it comes to this situation with my aunt, and when it comes to other situations with which I have been in practice with this, I don't really have to do any of those steps anymore. And when it comes to new situations, sometimes I have to do some of them, but rarely do I have to actually do the walking back, the stripping away of all the masks. Usually I can have a new situation arise, and just ask the emotion to show its true face, and that's it. And it comes pretty quickly. So I'll admit, I'm not living in a constant state of unconditional love, which I do believe is possible and the goal. But I am living in a state where I experience love more often than not. And when I do experience something that could be considered a painful emotion, it passes very quickly. And this is not something that I ever believed possible. I mean, I told you all of the stuff about the addiction and the trauma and the abuse and the depression and the attempts on my life and all of that, simply to illustrate the point that I am not somebody who has had the privilege of living a mostly happy life. I am someone who has genuinely experienced the depths of really negative emotions, but I am still at this time living a life where I feel mostly love and joy. Something that I really never, it's like a miracle for me. For that past aspect of myself would not even believe that this is my life, that this is my experience, and it's not tied to anything external. It's all internal. And it's amazing. I mean, I had a connection with someone that I really cared about kind of fall apart, right? Someone who was kind of like a romantic interest. And in the past, that would have devastated me. I would have tied my self-worth to being rejected by this person. I would have acted in a desperate manner. But now I recognize that any sadness or pain I feel related to that connection falling apart is rooted in love for that person. And rooted in love for myself, because I had to walk away because that person wasn't valuing me the way that I know I deserve. So all I feel now is love. And if I do feel sadness, I can have it pass very quickly and feel love. And what's especially amazing about this is that it makes your connections to other people and other events stronger and more enduring. The love I share with my aunt, even though she's not in this dimension anymore, I still have that connection to her. That was part of our connection, was that love. A major part of our connection. The best part of any connection is love. I still have that. I still have that with this other person. That's not something that he can give me or take away ever. I have that. That's mine. And it's beautiful. I have that with my friends, whether or not I'm in communication with them. I get to experience that with family, with events in my life that I cherish. They may be past, but I still feel that love. I still have that tie, that cord of love connecting me to all of these people and events and situations that I love. And I'm able to feel it because I engaged in this thought experiment, because I practiced it again and again and again, because I continue to practice it and have incorporated it into my life. And I invite you to do the same. I invite you to do the same even if you don't think it'll work. I invite you to do the same even if you think it's silly. Because really, it costs you nothing. It's very simple. It's not time consuming. You just have a feeling that you don't want to feel anymore, and you talk to it a little bit. And you can do that in your head. If you are around other people, you just feel awkward talking out loud to a feeling, you could just do it in your head. It's all internal anyway, right? It costs you nothing. And it's going to work. Even if you think it's not going to work, just keep practicing it. Keep practicing these steps. Sit with the feeling for a moment. Trace back its masks until you get to love. Incite feelings of love by remembering whatever it is that particular love is attached to, remembering those reasons for it. And just continue to do this. And the more you do this, the more that feeling of love will grow. And the easier it will become until you're feeling love more often than not, just like I am. And it really is possible, even if you are at the lowest point in your emotional experience. It truly, I take it from someone who has really been there. This actually works, and it is amazing, and it feels so good. Not just emotionally. Of course, it feels emotionally good. It feels spiritually good because you're more in alignment with your spirit, which is love, but it also feels physically good. It feels physically good. It's hard to describe the sensation, but it's kind of like a sort of a tingly feeling, but more grounded. And it's really good. And what I really like about it is that I actually like feeling my body. I like being in my body. I used to be addicted to heroin. I used to chase the feeling of leaving my body or putting a buffer between myself and my experience of my body. And now I actually really enjoy being in my body and feeling my body. It's amazing. And here's the thing. This truly is the easiest thing. It's natural. It's already done. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to post more videos, so if you enjoyed it, subscribe, and then you'll get notifications. Okay, I'm going to go now. Thanks for listening.